Hello, everybody. What's up? And welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz. Today we're going to be talking about murder in Amish country. This one is, all right. So I was watching a show last night and I was watching this case and I was like, man, why has nobody really talked about this? Because this not only covers the satanic kind of aspect like we're doing this month on my channel, also talks about mental disease and defect, and obviously a true crime or murder has transpired. And the difference between a traditional Amish life and the new modern, like technologically savvy world that we live in. So today we're going to be talking about the true crime case of Katie Gingerich and her husband Ed Gingerich. Now, this murder takes place on Katie's 29th birthday, and this is on the 18th of March of 1993. This is when the murder takes place, but I'm going to bring you back to 1983, 10 years earlier. Now, Katie and her family moved to northwestern Pennsylvania to a new Amish settlement. Now, this is called Brown Hill, where they moved to. They are a part of an older Amish order, which is a super traditional Amish background. They can't have anything with a battery, nothing electric, nothing modern, no modern medicine, nothing. Katie fit in very well after they moved from their old settlement area to the new one in Brown Hill. And she fit in due to how well-mannered she was. She was very quiet. She was very nice. She loved giving, like being able to do her part in her community. Now, like any other girl in these communities, she finished her 8th grade year and that was it for school. She went on to start working at 4 a.m. in the morning until her chores were done, which generally was about bedtime. And Katie thrived in life. She enjoyed her peace in her Amish ways. She loved the Amish lifestyle. She just loved being her. And as she grew older, obviously things are expected of you. Now, if you are in this community, you're expected as a woman to marry by the time you turn 20. Now, as she entered her 20s, she didn't have a husband. And as she, typically speaking, as you would venture into your 20s, if you didn't marry, you were considered a spinster. And this becomes more of a thing when her sister Barbara, who's a year younger, ends up getting married. And this leaves Katie kind of like in an odd place. Like, am I just going to be a spinster? Am I going to get married? And there wasn't a lot of eligible bachelors at this time because generally you would pair up in your late teen years and you would start to court, and that's what would begin your process to marriage. Like the families would get to know you and stuff like that before obviously you would marry. Now, the only boy that is available is a 19-year-old named Ed Gingerich. And at this time, Katie is 21 and he is 19. He is unruly and he's a misfit in the eyes of the bishop, and he doesn't fit in. He stands out too much, and he's a well-versed mechanic, and he worked in the sawmill that they had. But he also loved to get in trouble, and he also liked to befriend the English. Now, the English is like modern people, like me. And Ed also felt very at odds with his religion. Now, Katie's parents had very mixed emotions when it came to setting up Katie and Ed together to start courting. And Katie's uncle as well is actually the town bishop. So he's the big figure of town. Everything kind of needs to go through him. And unfortunately, there was bad blood between Ed and the bishop. So that just kind of made things really odd. But eventually, the bishop and Katie's parents felt that this could be good. And they allowed them to court, which they were polar opposites. Katie eventually would fall in love with Ed, but Ed was kind of like, he fought himself over marrying Katie due to like him having to commit himself to the full Amish life, which is what he didn't want. But eventually Ed decides to propose to Katie, and he proposes to her in the fall of 1986. Now, what Katie doesn't realize is that her nightmare has just started. Her nightmare of her life has literally just started. And even Katie couldn't predict what was going to be happening to her after they marry. So on December 2nd of 1986, they get married in a traditional sealing ceremony. After the ceremony is dinner, and then German hymns follow after that. And after they settle down, obviously, they go back to their home. Well, it's not long after they get married, 10 months exactly. This is when Katie gives birth to their first son, Danny. And Katie is thrilled to be a mom, but Ed is not. He hates his life. He just doesn't want anything to do with it. In the summer of 1988, this is when Ed starts really changing. He becomes quiet. He's sulking. He's surly, and he's angry. And Katie continues to pray for him every day. But what she doesn't know is that he's actually clinically depressed. And unfortunately, their community doesn't know how to treat this. And traditionally, they treat illnesses in an older way with like herbs and stuff like that instead of actual modern medicine, because no modern medicine is allowed in their community. So Katie, because she is kind of upset and she doesn't know what to do with Ed, she goes to the bishop, and he then points them to a chiropractor. No, I'm not kidding. A chiropractor for depression. So this went nowhere, obviously, and Ed continues to fall deeper and deeper into his depression. And nobody else in the Amish community believed that he was ill, and Katie's the only one that actually really saw his struggles day to day. So they would welcome 2 other children, Ennis and Mary. Mary is the youngest, and she becomes more of a key person in the story later on. So keep that in mind. Ed would become more and more depressed, and him and Katie would eventually start fighting. And this fighting would turn violent. So Katie was seen around the community with bruising, but in their traditions, they're not allowed to seek out help, especially when it comes to stuff like this, because you're, as a woman, you're trained to be loyal to your husband, and she couldn't turn to help from any other person. So Ed feels better when he goes back to the sawmill. And he starts having a friendship with a man named Dave Lindsay. Now, Dave Lindsay is a born-again Christian. And Dave introduces his, wills, wants, and traditions through his religion. And he tries to convert Ed. Ed then goes to Katie about his doubts of their Amish lifestyle. And Katie's absolutely horrified. She finds nothing wrong with their lifestyle. She loves it. And she's just really confused as to why Ed is acting this way. So in the spring of 1992, Katie couldn't think her home life could get any worse, but Ed starts now seeing things. He's at this point where his paranoia is now projecting him to see things. So at one point, he thought that there were eyes in the ceiling, and he started spitting at them. Really, they were just flies, but he also thought that the devil was trying to take his soul, and he, at one point, he jumped out of his second-story window and then ran down the road talking about how the devil was trying to take his soul. His fellow Amish brethren blamed it on his shameful ways of befriending the English and trying to be one with the English folk. So there's another day when he's doing his chores out in the open, wide open, and he has a severe mental breakdown. It takes about 7 other men to subdue him as Katie watches in horror. she just watches as what's happening to her husband, and she has no idea how to help him. Ed is then he's fully consumed by his paranoia, and he has a psychotic breakdown. Thankfully, the townsfolk call 911 to get him help with modern medicine. He is then taken to a hospital, and he is then transferred to a psychiatric ward after he is diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. They then allow him to take his modern medicine in the hospital, and then when he comes home, he is also allowed to take his modern medicine to help regiment him in a way that he is normalized. But his side effects start getting worse. He's somewhat normalized except for his paranoia. His paranoia keeps growing and growing. And eventually this causes him to think, oh, hey, the medicine's not working, so I'm just not going to take it. So he stops taking it because he doesn't think it's working. Now his friend Dave again tries to convert him yet again and has a serious discussion with him. This is when Dave tells him that his wife was responsible for keeping him in the Amish community, in the Amish culture, and if he doesn't convert from being Amish to the Evangelical Christian background that his friend is, that Ed will go to hell. And this is when Ed starts to think that Katie is the devil. So, yes. That, my friends, is part 1 of this story. I'm breaking it up into 2. That way you kind of get a feel for what's happening. So Katie is just a normal Amish girl. She marries this boy who is like the wild card of the entire community. And then we kind of see like his mental history before I want to get into the murder, because it kind of gets a little more weird. But I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye, guys.